Hello and welcome to the CFB Super Show. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dubdeuce85, aka Balanced Betty, as some may call me. And this may be the Balanced Betty broadcast. We're going to be having a Balanced Betty bash, as it may. Pricing is getting tighter in this early on, which we love. So we'll have to see if that continues for both college basketball and perhaps college football. I'm, of course, joined by another of my partners here in the Balanced Betty regime, Jay Kuchek, who has been tearing it up lately in college basketball and college football, of course, what he's known for. I'm excited to be doing the show with him tonight, and we're going to find some good stuff for Saturday as the grind is very, very tiresome, but the show goes on and we must continue. I was out of power last week, still was able to come on and do the show and do my thing. And Jake's been right there grinding along with me. So how are you doing tonight, sir? How's things been? And recap a little bit about last week. We nailed some calls and did quite well.
Yeah, doing good, man. It has been an unbelievable run in college basketball, and I'll be the first one to say I'm standing on the shoulders of geniuses. I know very little. That is not my forte. So you guys can take even a novice like me and make me successful. So that's been great. But yeah, back to last week. It was interesting. It was an interesting start to the slate on the main, because we got nothing from Mo Ibrahim and nothing from Mayan Williams very early on, and it was kind of looking like one of those slates where it's like, I don't know how often I want to check the lineups, and it could get kind of messy, right? And they ultimately pulled through, and that's the thing with volume backs like that. Especially that Ohio State game with the weather. CJ Stroud throwing for less than 100 yards. Obviously, we kind of nailed it being a running game. I didn't necessarily know it would be that much of a running game, but both of those ended up okay. I think they both got over 100 yards and a couple touchdowns, which, not a slate breaking performance, but didn't kill you either. And we had some other calls that hit. My conviction call at the end of the show was Dylan Gabriel. I said he was going to go for 404. He got to 360 total yards between running and passing in 3. So not far off. I think he did, pretty well relative to expectation. The guy that put me over the top, though, in a little bit of a Pyrrhic victory, because I think we lost him to the year for injury, was your Colorado receiver call. Name's escaping me right now.
Yeah, it was the great Jalen Tyson. We did lose him this season. Yeah.
That was amazing. Like that was the one play that took the lineups from like, okay, I'm cashing, but it's whatever, to like, oh, might have to start looking a little bit closer. What's going on here? Because I was pretty low owned and caught that long touchdown and stayed involved up until the point where he got injured. So it was a pretty good one to have. And then I had Bucky Irving on the other side of that. And nothing is more frustrating than Bucky Irving being down at like the 2, because he's not getting another shot at it. Bo Nix is taking that touchdown in every single time, right? Yeah. So, but yeah, no, it was good, and we hit some stuff on PrizePicks as well. I don't know that the exact one that I gave out on the show hit, but hit some pretty good ones, and then also hit one on the late slate. The Cal passing game was doing quite well. I don't know what the eventual yardage total, but it was like gobs of amounts of yards over the 240 or so that Plummer hit, and that was kind of my anchor piece to my night slate PrizePicks. So overall, very, very good week, and gave me the bankroll and the confidence to go attack college basketball, something I know nothing about, and have had a decent amount of success over there too. So I'm pumped to get back into actual college football after the madness that has been happening all week with the MAC. We had, mass chaos and high fives and, shipping, first place in $200 entry tournaments with our guy Tenacious D Jones on the Tuesday slate. And then the Wednesday slate, it was like just pure chaos. Everything went wrong. The wrong Central Michigan quarterback ran for like 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. And it was the guy that no one played, as opposed to the guy that only some of us played that we thought was going to get the snaps. It's like, man, the MAC giveth and the MAC taketh away. And
it does.
There was no better encapsulation of that than Tuesday. We were all riding high. And then Wednesday, it was like, I don't think I saw a single person in the Discord because we were all just like, what is happening? It's crazy.
Yeah. Bauer not doing any playing at all. It's like, okay, the slate's over for me because he wasn't high enough to own to survive that either. And it was like, we got him last week and he crushed for us. And this week it was like, for some reason he didn't play. But yeah, these weekday slates have been kind of funny. But yeah, no, last week we were really hitting our stride on these, this middle of the season. The first couple of weeks we did well, but it was like we're now hitting a stride where these lower owned plays are hitting. And I'd been waiting for the low owned receiver call to really pay off. I hadn't really hit that yet. And targeting that Oregon passing game is something that I love to do. They happen to be playing my Huskies next, so that'll be a game we're targeting my man Rome. But we went, a lot of us, I think you did too, the 4 running back thing, and it went really well. Kendre Miller was low owned again. He produced again, even though he was off to kind of a weird start. Mo Ibrahim came back and played well, like you said. Tyjae Spears played well. It was the Baylor running backs that I think at this official moment I'm writing off, and I don't care if they're chalk. I don't care if they break the slate. I don't care if they I'm just done because there was a little bit of chatter about, we're not going to run Richard Reese into the ground 32, 35 times. Okay. That to me means, well, they're going to give him 22 to 25?
18 to 20, not 6.
not like 4. I mean, he scored a touchdown, so it wasn't all bad, but my God, how we could have had such a massive day if he just had the normal, even half of what he normally got. So that
he was like the one missing leg on a bunch of PrizePicks entries too. So it was like double whammy. He's dragging the DFS lineup down. He's killing the PrizePicks. It's like, I should have known better than trust freaking Richard Reese. Has been a thorn in our side all season. Who
I'd been like, nope, this guy's not the guy. Like the whole season, it's like they got all these injured running backs. Okay, he's finally the guy. Fine, I'll finally bite the bullet and play him. And then that happens to me. Just that I deserve that for sure. And then my man Brock Bowers, he didn't come through either. So that was kind of tough. But yeah, the Tyson and Kendre Miller and and Drake May, of course, was really chalky. He was the one quarterback we were both like, yes. And it worked out great. So we're going into a nice main slate here with some really good games and a little bit of news to perhaps track as well. But, the West Virginia-Oklahoma game sticks out. We, of course, have, Ohio State. They're playing the Hoosiers, LSU, Arkansas. That's going to be a good one, although there might be some news with KJ we have to monitor. SMU's playing the lowly South Florida. So there's going to be, potential for a really high-scoring slate here. Michigan's playing Nebraska. A lot of spots that we can target. So we're going to do our thing here, go position by position, start with the quarterback, break down the slate as best we can, kind of give our, 2 to 3 favorites on each side like we do. And then we'll talk prize picks, any betting opportunities, props, stuff like that. If anyone's watching live and wants to interact in the chat, feel free to fire your comments, questions, concerns, whatever that may be, and we'll get through that as we go. But let's jump in and start with quarterbacks. And Jake, if you don't mind, I'll have you kind of start us off here and see where we're headed here and what direction the quarterbacks we're looking at.
Yeah. So for me, far and away, we got to go back to the well with Tanner Mordecai. Yep. He wasn't on a main slate or any slate really in the most recent week in their game against Houston. Must have been like a weird start time or something that kept them off the slate. But if you are not aware of what Tanner Mordecai did last week, 28 of 37 for 379 yards. Okay, pretty pedestrian day, little bit above average for him. Also threw 9 touchdowns. also threw 9 touchdowns, added 8 rushes for 54 yards and a touchdown on the ground for a total of 10 touchdowns. Walt, has a quarterback ever accounted for 10 touchdowns in the history of college football?
I don't know, man. That's nuts. That's a really wild performance. Really.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, yes, it was Houston. Houston could keep up. Houston's defense is terrible. SMU's defense is terrible. Like, that was like the ultimate ping pong game. And had it been on the main slate, you were dead if you weren't like every single player except for one from that game, right? So, it's, you know, a little bit of give and take with it not being on that slate, because it would have turned everything upside down on its head. So the crazy thing is, like, he's not going to throw 9 touchdowns again, but like this also is kind of within the realm of expectation of like, could he go for 405? Like, I think he kind of could. Like, even Service Academy game against Navy, 336-3 in, you know, a game that Navy running the ball because SMU's terrible defense. They were very successful with that. And then he had 674-2 on the ground. Like, just you don't think of Tanner Mordecai as like a mobile quarterback. Like, that's not really his thing. But in these last 3 weeks, now the game against Cincy, he got sacked a ton and ended up with negative 41 yards. I don't see USF's defense getting to him at all. I do see them potentially being able to run the ball and keep it close enough that he has to keep throwing. Obviously not to the same level, but probably with roughly the same efficiency, right? So gonna be all in on the Tanner Mordecai and Rashad Rice stack. We'll get to the Rashad Rice part of it, and we'll get to some value plays that will allow you to do those things. Another one that I'm going to be pretty in on, you know, I can't really do it yet because the next one was going to be Plumlee. I was ready for Plumlee to be back. We haven't got the clearance. I don't know what's wrong with the dude at this point. Mikey Keene was serviceable, but obviously if Plumlee's fully healthy, we're going to consider going there. I'm not going to say it yet. He's not going to be part of my 3-man because we don't have him healthy. I am going to go to CJ Stroud, and I probably seem like a broken record in doing that. I was not on CJ Stroud last week. I didn't think he was going to be as poor and underwhelming as he was. A lot of that had to do with weather, and then it just being like an ugly, gross kind of quintessential Big Ten game. But let's keep in mind, Ohio State has still got a playoff to think about, style points to think about, CJ Stroud's Heisman campaign to think about, CJ Stroud's draft stock to think about. For my own selfish purposes, CJ Stroud's season-long passing yardage total, which is a little bit behind schedule now because of that crappy game. We've got that to think about. So we need like a 450-yard game out of CJ Stroud, and if he stays in all game, he'll absolutely do that. He'll crush that. Obviously Indiana's not going to keep pace. If Indiana can keep it within 3 scores for any semblance of the game, or if Ohio State's just like, screw it, we're just going to keep the foot on the gas. Could it's not going to be a 10 touchdown game, but could be a 5 or 6 touchdown game pretty easily. So 2 pretty expensive quarterbacks are kind of what I'm looking at to start. And then we got to go down, not even really going down that far anymore, but it's another one that's going to be dependent on injury. But our boy that I seem to like, and I seem to think is underpriced pretty much every week at 6,500 this week is KJ Jefferson. I know that there was some speculation that there might be a little bit of an injury. He had some turnover issues against Liberty last week. But if he is fully healthy, and I think there's a better shot at him being fully healthy than Plumlee being fully healthy, I think at that price we gotta go there, right? Like he was he was at roughly the same price, like, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we were both like, man, KJ Jefferson, what are you guys doing with this price? And then he won I don't know if that was the BYU week or the Auburn week. I think it was actually it was both, because he was 63 and 64 in 2 of those, and put up damn near 30 fantasy points in one and over 40 in the other. And the price just isn't going up at all. And he started this season like mid sevens, right? So he's had a really good season. He's coming down. The only thing to keep in mind is, we do have some injury concerns. So I will tentatively add him in there as my inexpensive salary saving quarterback to pair with Stroud or Mordecai as you see fit.
Yeah. So the blurb, so I want to pull it up here. It says KJ Jefferson played at less than 100% last weekend against Liberty, but of course they're going to say that after he lost, as he deals with what has been described as a bruised clavicle that required a steroid injection. And until an urgent fourth quarter effort that sparked a rally that was too little too late, blah, 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 it's fair to ponder whether or not Arkansas may have had better luck generating more offense through Malik Hornsby. So that's a take. We'll see. Hornsby actually wasn't too bad when he played earlier in the year. So that's worth monitoring, because I mean, if Hornsby were to start, I actually kind of have interest at 5'9", but yeah, Jefferson, it was the Auburn game for us it was right after BYU, where it's like, wow, this dude just torched them. He's only this price. Why isn't everyone on him? And he ended up being high owned, and 30 was probably felt like a letdown, but at that price, it was amazing. So we'll monitor that. But I agree with you on both. Mordecai for sure. How do you not play him after last week? Of course, this will be one where it'll be a rushing affair for SMU, and everybody in the Discord will be like, "What the hell's going on?" But his newfound rushing ability is nice to see an 8-1 against a USF team. Yeah, he's got to be there. So I'll start though with a guy that I don't really want to pay this price for, but Jaden Daniels sitting there at 8.5, he just continues to defy my expectations for him. We use Jaden Daniels all the time on the late night slates for ASU, and it wasn't for his passing. It was just because he was such an amazing rusher for them. Him and White, Rachel would just do all the damage for them and all the rushing yards. And when he did throw, he'd just throw those little, 2-yard dump offs to White for a touchdown. So I really didn't expect him to come in the SEC and play that well. And he's kind of the reverse Bo Nix. Bo Nix kind of struggled in the SEC, goes to the Pac-12 and is monstered the whole world. It's amazing to see what he's doing. Jaden Daniels was adequate in the Pac-12, comes to the SEC, and suddenly he's playing way better. As a passer too, which is just phenomenal. Seeing him throw, back-to-back 300+ yard games. The passing's kind of gone down slightly, but the completion rate is staying very high. So they're putting him in a position to make really good throws that he can handle. And then his rushing upside is just keeping defenses, befuddled a little bit, or they're preparing for that. And it's giving him the, those medium routes to throw the ball. And he's just completing high percentage looks and racking it up. So going against Arkansas. Oh, yeah, were you gonna say something?
Real quick, the one thing I want to say, because you might look at this from the betting perspective too. Mm-hmm. This feels like the ultimate letdown spot, right? Mm-hmm. Like you beat Alabama at home. Yeah. They're partying till 5 a.m, playing neck, doing all kinds of stuff you're not supposed to do in Louisiana all week, like just celebrating that all week, and then you got to go on the road, fairly early kickoff. I feel like LSU comes out extremely flat. Not to say that outside of like that context, I would have loved to play Jaden Daniels. I can't get on any of the LSU side this week. That was just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think it opened at like +3 for Arkansas, and now it's like +3.5. That when I first saw that, before the KJ Jefferson injury thing, I was like, wow, that's going to be a really obvious and almost too easy betting spot to bet the Razorbacks. Like, I feel like I'm just walking into a trap. Like, that felt too easy. And now I see this Jefferson business. It's like, oh, I'm glad I kind of waited to see what's going on there, because yeah, that does feel like a classic letdown for LSU after that win. But yeah, and it's gonna be tough, because running defense wise, the Arkansas Razorbacks rush defense has definitely kind of sprung a leak lately. That's kind of why I was so heavy on Tank Bigsby a couple of weeks ago when they stopped giving the ball for some reason. And then up against Liberty. I would have been all over A.J. Hunter, but he ended up getting hurt and he's out for the year now. So that would have sucked for me. So their rushing defense really isn't too good. So Daniels, I think will have an opportunity to have one of his games where he rushes for 102 touchdowns, perhaps. Passing wise, maybe it's not as good on the road, but he's somebody there that I had to definitely highlight. He's more of a GPP look for me because I typically haven't been paying that high price for quarterbacks. It's been kind of the construction that I like to do with my running backs being expensive. So he's the first name I said just because I think there's so much slate breaking upside there, but he's definitely not a guy that I'm super comfortable playing in my main lineup because he's a guy that I've been kind of cautious with. He continues to blow up. And if I'm going to jump on him, this is like the Richard Reese spot. There's going to be something that happens where it doesn't work out. But I think if Jefferson plays, I'm almost more apt to play Daniels because I think it'll be more competitive that way. And then if Jefferson doesn't play, I might be a little more backed off because they might just try to run the ball a lot with their running backs and trying to figure out LSU running backs. Good luck. Next quarterback for me, it's not going to be pretty. I continue to want to pound the matchup against Oklahoma, whether they win or lose. That's not that important to me, but JT Daniels is sitting there at 6'7". What is it? CJ Donaldson is I believe out. Is he out for the year or banged up and not going to be playing? So
he's definitely hurt.
Yeah, that's okay. So he's out for the rest of the season. So that's a major weapon on the ground for West Virginia to be missing in this great matchup. So they may have to rely on throwing the ball a lot, and throwing against Oklahoma is something you can do. Typically, you don't have to because you can run all over them. So this is a game where I think JT Daniels ends up throwing it 39 to 40 times. And prior to the last game, which was against Iowa State, he threw 8 for 22. It was an awful game, one of his worst ever. But before that, he had 39 attempts, 36, 37, 48. And this is against TCU, Texas Tech, Baylor, Texas, all teams outside of maybe Baylor, whose defense is pretty suspect at times and has the offense that is going to turn into these like fast-paced type of things. And I think that JT Daniels will get into a shootout here with Oklahoma. Will he be able to keep up? No, probably not. He'll probably throw some picks, but that volume at 6'7", 40 to 45 attempts, possibly hitting 300 yards is definitely pretty tasty to me. So maybe another of the GPP looks, but I'm just going to continue to pound out against this Oklahoma matchup because I know that, Deckers, he still ended up basically making value because of how cheap he was. It wasn't the greatest that we wanted. Chapin didn't really have a good game. I was a guy that I was kind of leaning on if I wasn't going to play Reese. I ended up playing Reese, and of course Craig, Squirrel ran for almost 200 yards. Chapin had 14 for 23 and 132 yards, so not his best game. They came out and said that he was still banged up too, but that's just convenient to say that after a bad game. So I don't know if I buy that anyways. So the last two quarterbacks against Oklahoma haven't been great. You have JT Daniels, who, when he was at Georgia, it was like, this is the greatest thing ever. When he's at USC, it's the greatest thing ever, and just ends up not being in those spots. And now he's at West Virginia, where he's finally going to be able to show the world what he has, and it's not been that great of a season. So I'm not really selling him that well. It's just primarily the fact that he's going to have a major volume passing wise, and 6'7" is just a reasonable price to maybe check that. We have Plumlee, we have Sanders, we have a bunch of injury, Jefferson. There's like a bunch of injuries here and news that we're going to have to track. We do have college basketball in the mix. So, I'm going to be definitely still checking the mix, checking the news and on both, but it's really like, I need to make some decisions for myself on what I'm going to play. And if I want to, delve into an injury quarterback, or if I want to take kind of a sure thing. And then the other QB to really look at, and if I'm going, it's going to be just like every time these guys are on the slate and talking about Tulane, it's like, do I want to play Pratt or do I want to play Spears? And there's, a decent amount of running backs this week that I like, so I'll have to make that decision. And I think whichever one I'm not playing, then I will go ahead and plug in the other. So if it's Spears, that I'm going to be using, obviously I'm not using it with Pratt. And if I'm going to decide to fade Spears in my main, then I think I need to go over to Pratt, who does have the dual threat upside in a matchup here against UCF, who defensively has been pretty solid at times this year. Definitely not, unstoppable to the point where they won't give up touchdowns. Pratt does have 4 rushing scores in his last, 4 games. The passing has been a little bit tough in terms of yardage. He does have, 5 passing touchdowns in his last 3 and only 1 interception. So the completion rate there and accuracy has been better. And he's only 6'1", which is really quite cheap for him. So we don't need him to go out and throw for 404, but if he rushes for, 50 to 60 yards, scores a touchdown or 2, whatever he gets for us on the passing side, 1 to 2 touchdowns, 200 yards is going to be just an extra, and he's going to hit that 20 to 25 mark. I think we get in this kind of, unrealistic expectation sometimes because we hit on a 6'5" quarterback who gives us, 35 fantasy points. And it's like, okay, every week I'm expecting this guy to get me 35. Like the Deckers week, it's like everyone was disappointed because everyone thought he's going to, he should have got us 35 in this matchup. He got us 19 to 20. Like he still didn't kill us. That was a week we still cashed quite well. I mean, I know I did. And it's not a realistic expectation to assume that they're going to do that every week. So a 20 to 25 out of Pratt at that price of 6'1" is definitely okay if it happens. Now, I didn't want to repeat everything you said, but I am certainly going to be playing Tanner Mordecai in my main. If I go 1 quarterback or 2, he's going to be in it. I haven't decided yet. Like I said, there's a lot of running backs I like. I do want to play Jaden Daniels a little bit, but I don't want to pay 8.5 for him. And I feel like I'm late to the party there. So the 3 guys I really talked about are probably more on the GPP side, except for Pratt. And I haven't had much luck with the cheap quarterbacks lately. Pratt, Rourke, Deckers, some of these cheapies didn't really treat us well. We went back up to a kind of a upper mid tier in Drake May last week and we smashed out. So I definitely want to go up to like Mordecai because I think that's the sweet spot for quarterback, 8-1. Even Hendon Hooker sitting there at 8-3. So there's a couple of options in that range, but I'm with you on Mordecai being the far and away QB1, but he's going to be pretty popular, obviously. So what are some other quarterbacks in the pool here? Hooker, I just kind of mentioned him briefly, but maybe Gabriel and his nice matchup against West Virginia as well. Who else do you like?
Yeah, Gabriel is another one that I was going to mention. The only thing that has me a little bit sour on him is he has exhibited, at least until this point, some pretty stark home road splits. Home games, he's been extremely efficient. He's run the ball a ton more, a lot more volumes. I had more home games too, but run the ball a ton more, seeing the end zone more, throwing way more touchdowns at home, just generally more effective at home. 304.6 yards a game at home as opposed to 168 yards a game on the road. Very small sample size that we're dealing with. I just, there's enough telling me to go Tanner Mordecai over Dylan Gabriel anyway that I throw in a little bit of Dylan Gabriel might not be as efficient on the road, and they're like virtually the same price. I'm probably just going to go Tanner Mordecai. If we didn't have Tanner Mordecai available, I'd probably be a little bit more likely to get into Dylan Gabriel, even though he's on the road. Also, did you get into Malik Cunningham at all? No. So you kind of never know what you're going to get with Malik Cunningham. You also kind of never know what you're going to get with the Clemson defense. And we think of the Clemson defense as, a pretty tough defense, but they've shown sometimes that's the case, and historically that could be the case every now and then, but then they go out and give up 35 points to Notre Dame. and so I don't know, man. Maybe Malik Cunningham gets bad Clemson and just absolutely runs wild and could be a slate breaker at a price that's also close enough to Mordecai that pretty much no one's going to play him, right? And so he's one of those guys that it feels like the Jerome Ford of last season, that like when no one is interested and the price is high enough that you're like, well, now I have to think about it, and there's somebody else that everybody's on at that same price. Malik Cunningham's going to come out of nowhere and put up like a 50-point game on Clemson, and we're going to be going, what the heck happened? How did Malik Cunningham do that to Clemson? And so that's the only guy that I'm kind of like, pretty amazing high ceiling game could come out of this spot, but it's definitely GPP only because it's a lot more likely that we're going to get a high ceiling game out of Mordecai, and that's the direction I'll go in a main type lineup.
Yeah, Cunningham in years past, he was just like an auto play for me, in all of my lineups because we could just rely on him. He's scoring at such a high rate on the ground, and he had a nice stretch this season, but yeah, it just hasn't quite been together there in terms of consistency. He's got Doman kind of breathing down his neck there, and yeah, it's kind of tough, but I like that call. And he's in that, kind of range there, the 7.5 to 8.5 range, where we've had some pretty good success with quarterbacks. I do want to mention Riley Leonard of Duke sitting there at 7.9. That's a price point that, he was 7.8 last week. That's the highest he's been all season, I think, in his career. That'll probably be a turnoff to people. Looking at what Virginia Tech has done recently in terms of their defense, it's been bad. Like Zach Pirion was the quarterback for Georgia Tech in the last game Virginia Tech played. He threw for 253 and a touchdown. He rushed for 66 and a touchdown. I'm not going to lie. I don't know a lot about Zach Pirion, so the fact that he did that against Virginia Tech, okay, I'll buy into that. I do know a little bit more about MJ Morris for the Wolfpack, who, kind of said, step aside, Jack Chambers. This is my team. Once Leary leaves for the pros, threw for 265 and 3 against them. He also, he only rushed for 12 yards, got sacked a couple of times, but he had some nice, like, electric style plays. Tyler Van Dyke threw for 351 and 2 against this Virginia Tech team. And they only scored 20 points in that game, but he still threw for, huge yardage. Of course, we know, Israel, Abenconda, he had that massive, crazy game. So that's the running portion there. We know North Carolina lit them up for 40 plus. Drake May, 363 and 3. Rushing wise, he rushed for 73 and 2. So the Hokies defense kind of has this reputation of being kind of a stronger unit from years past. But they're not. They're, especially when they have a quarterback that is capable of running the football as well. They really find themselves in a lot of trouble. And I think Riley Leonard's going to go way under the radar. Sitting there at 7.9, I think that's a price point. Like I said, it's just going to turn people off. I think the matchup against Virginia Tech, just whatever reason in people's head, and I find myself thinking that too, like, oh, they're a good defense because scoring wise, they don't give up a ton of points, but yardage, they give up a ton, and especially to dual threats. And Leonard has had, this last 3 games, 96 yards rushing, 61 and 130. And then he had a 29, a 60, a 54, a 66, a 64. Like, his rushing yards are pretty damn consistent. Now you're putting him in front of a defense that is probably going to just kind of mail it in. I think their season, that, I'm not trying to talk too much trash on them, but they don't look like they care at all. That's on the coaching, of course. And Leonard's not going to give us as much on the passing yardage. Like, his props are always at like 190, and I'm like, he can get that, but he really probably can't. So like 150 and a touchdown, but it's all going to be on the ground for him, 100 plus and a couple of touchdowns, or even if it's like 75 yards and 3 scores, like, that's going to pay off that 7.9 point. It's right underneath Mordecai. Everyone's going to go there. You have Gabriel, maybe if people want to go there. Hendon Hooker, who we haven't really talked about, after he got just completely embarrassed against Georgia, sacked a crap ton of times, just couldn't fumble the ball, an interception, no touchdowns for him, which is, I think, the first time in over 2 years since he was actually for the Hokies. And he's just, going to be looking for some vengeance here against Missouri at 8.3. That's another price point where I think he could go a little lower on. The only thing is, Hooker typically is, like, his name for whatever reason is associated with being a monster DFS play, and he is. And even on slates where I don't think he'll be highly owned, he ends up carrying like 25-30% ownership, where I'm like, oh, okay, wow, I totally missed that. I saw at least 3 other guys ahead of him, but that's cool. And then he goes up at, a 28 to 30. Like, I see him doing that again here at that 8.3 price point. And again, that's just right underneath Jaden Daniels. So we have a bunch of these 7.5 to 8.5 guys that I'm kind of zeroing in on. Again, I like the cheap range of Pratt and JT Daniels. I think those guys can work out. Jackson Dart at 6'4". I think that's not horrible going against the Alabama team that is just, not their normal selves. There's a couple of options here we can really look at, but I think that, even Hunter Decker is just sitting there at 5'7". They're here. That's a perfect example. Nobody's going to play him. No one's going to talk about him. They're playing an Oklahoma State defense that, Jesus, they can't stop anyone. The only thing that could get dicey is if, Spencer Sanders mails it in the rest of the season and can't play. Maybe there's no points that come from the Oklahoma State side. You're like, what are they going to do if they don't have Sanders? I mean, they put up 16 against Kansas last week, for God's sakes, 0 against Kansas State. It's just been tough without him. So, and we're seeing some really big scores coming out of guys like Devin Neal, who's been kind of lost in the sauce since week 1, 224 yards against Oklahoma State. So we'll get to the running backs in that game too. But I think that, well, not that they have many on the Cyclone side, but I think that Decker's at 5.7 is one of those plays where he could put up a sneaky 30 and everybody would be like, oh, wow, didn't even realize, didn't see him down there. So kind of a mix here of cheap and nice, mid-range. And then for me, I'm really not, I know you mentioned Stroud, like always in play, but I'm not really probably looking there for Maine just because we need competitive games. And then Bryce Young, who, on that, was it the night slate or the secondary slate? I was like, this is a great time to go to Bryce Young and unleash him on the world against LSU, and just didn't really have a great game. He threw the ball 51 times, so I had the right idea. It just didn't work out at his price point. So I'm back to pretty much ignoring him again. But a really strong group of quarterbacks here. And as I talk it through outside of Mordecai, I'm still really starting to like Riley Leonard a lot. So we'll see how that develops in the next 48 hours for me.
Since you're kind of circling back to that Duke game, that total to me seems extremely low at 49.5.
I agree.
Like it seems like both of them are bad on defense, very bad on defense.
Yeah.
And Von Tech's not particularly good on offense, but I feel like they can keep pace enough to keep Duke going, and Duke could probably get to 35-ish on their own, right? So, that might be an overspot.
Yeah, because they gave up, they scored 38 and they gave up to 31 to Boston College, and Boston College offense has been pretty bad.
College had a backup quarterback, and they were
scoring at will. Yeah,
Von Tech can't be that bad, right?
No, that's running back wise, they got to, and Miami, Tyler Van Dyke got hurt in the Miami game against them, and they played Jake Garcia, and he threw for 202 against them. They ended up scoring 21, but Duke scored 45. So yeah. Pretty often, actually, looking at their previous scores, they've been going over that total, like a 35-27 against Kansas, and against North Carolina was 38-35, 38-17 against Virginia. The only game out of their last 6 where that total didn't hit was against Georgia Tech, which we all thought that was going to be a high-scoring game, and it wasn't. So, yeah, I like that call on the betting side too, and might be some, because we know people look at the totals, they'll go to the totals and they'll immediately rule games out like, oh, that's under 60. Nope, no thank you. But we know there's plenty of fantasy goodness in these games, and we just have to find it. And Leonard's a pretty obvious play on paper for me, especially if everybody's going to be jumping off. All right, so that wraps up quarterback. We will go to running back here. And, man, there's a lot of speculative options here, like the RJ Harveys, the Roman Hembys, like not guys that I'm seriously maybe looking at here. But they're definitely going to be talked about as we get through the round, the kind of spitballing section. I think I have to start with, and I know it's probably stealing one, but I got to, and it's the first time really I've been talking about him after last year. He was like my brand buddy, of course, talking about Blake Corum. Going up here against Nebraska, the price is at 8.3. He's just continue. It doesn't matter if it's a blowout. It doesn't matter if it's a close game. It doesn't matter if their defense is good or if he's playing a lax defense. He's going to give us 100 yards or more. He's going to score up at least 1 touchdown and sometimes 2, sometimes more. And he's starting to catch a couple of passes here or there. It's not really happening very often like we saw last year, but against Nebraska, he could very well. And there's going to be the talk of like, well, he won't play much in the second half. He could have 150 and 2 in by halftime on this Nebraska team. And if that's the case, I'm perfectly fine paying this elevated price for him. If I'm looking to go a little bit on the cheap side on my QB2, or if I'm going to go with the 4th running back in Superflex, and it's on the table again this week, I think Blake Corum is just that safe running back option. And I think often paying up for running back, Bijan Robinson, Mo Ibrahim, all these guys where it's like, well, their prices are too high. They need 3 touchdowns and 150 to get there. They're in a blowout. It's like, okay, they're going to be the reason for the blowout. They're good. They're reaching 130 to 150 pretty much all the time. And in Mo Ibrahim's case, or Bijan's even, they're scoring the 2 to 3 touchdowns they need. So we just need to start, making that recognition. It's not necessarily us, but the industry as a whole. And I'm fine if they don't. But Corum is just going to be a guy I hope people are kind of worrying about blowouts, worrying about touches and backing off. But I think that both Corum and Edwards in this game, to a lesser extent, and maybe more for GPP, are going to absolutely shred in this game. Nebraska's defense has been awful all season long. We targeted against them consistently. Edwards is actually super intriguing at the mid 5s there, but I think, for 3K more, I know what I'm getting with Corum, and I'm just going to probably take that volume and run with it. Man, the next one has to be from, I'm being it feels lazy. It sounds lazy. I don't normally do this, but I have to mention as number 2, Jahmyr Gibbs, another expensive guy. I might not be able to play both, but I got to highlight both. The Ole Miss defensive front is just terrible. There are running backs just completely shredding them on a weekly basis. It's something that I kind of noticed a few weeks back. I think it might have been against Auburn when Tank Bigsby just totally crushed them. And then, coming up 2 weeks later was the Devin Ashane experience there, and he ran for 138 against them, and his ownership was high because of misprice. I don't think if he was priced correctly, he would have been that highly owned. It's definitely a matchup that we want to take advantage of. On LSU side, Josh Williams, who's typically like in a committee with them, he rushed for 76 yards and a touch. That was the game Jaden Daniels rushed for 121 and 3. We already mentioned Bigsby. This is a really good matchup for running backs as a whole. Tulsa, they gave up 65 plus yards to 3 different Tulsa backs, which is not good. And I think that this is a spot where, maybe I have to make a decision between Gibbs and Corum. I think Bama's going to be playing pissed. They're going to give Gibbs a lot of touches. Maybe Corum's definitely probably on the safer side. Maybe Gibbs better for GBP, but Gibbs' receptions and his passing work kind of puts him a little bit over the top for me because he may have 2/3 of the carries of Corum, but he's going to have those 4 to 8 catches that are going to push him back into it, and he has an opportunity to score multiple touchdowns that way. So I know it's lame as hell to do, but those 2 guys I'm really going to be probably battling with, and if I can find a way to fit both, I'm definitely going to want to do that. And then lastly, it's Tyler, going a little bit different with the SMU side, and the SMU running backs have tortured the fantasy industry all season long, myself included. I've actually been a little bit lucky with them because there's been weeks where they were super chalky. What was it? I think it was Belton Gardner week. I was like, I'm not comfortable with this. Everybody's on him. He's cheap. There was another cheap guy on it, and I think I got away from him. And of course, he had half the carries of the other guys. You have TJ McDaniel there. Trey Siggers has been banged up / out. McDaniel's back in the mix. Kamar Wheaton, you and I are really waiting for Kamar Wheaton's season to fully develop. Probably not going to happen this season, but he is getting some looks. But Tyler Levine sitting there at 3-4 after 25 carries in that monstrous, highest scoring game, I think, in SMU history. 146 yards, a touchdown, a couple of receptions. Might say, well, that was one game. Like, let's not get the Velton Gardner treatment. I think it might be safe. The game before that against Tulsa, he had 17 carries for 72 yards. This was the game he kind of came on my radar. He scored 3 touchdowns. The week before that against Cincy as the RB3, he had 7 carries for 31 yards and a touchdown. So this is your cheapie. I think he'll probably end up being popular depending on, status of different guys. That kind of volume he's getting could very easily evaporate, though. Like I'm looking at this and I'm having Richard Reese vibes because this will be the game where TJ McDaniel goes from 1 carry to 28, or Velton Gardner suddenly they want to give him 18 carries, which he had 18 against Tulsa, 8 last game because Levine was running so well. So it's not a very safe play, but at 3-4, he doesn't have to be safe. They're playing South Florida. This might be a spot where SMU runs the score up early and they're like, you know what, Tanner, you don't need to throw your arm out against these guys. We're going to hand it off now. Levine's going to get these 15 to 20 carries. And if that's the case at 3-4, he's absolutely going to pay it off. He's going to score at least once and probably push, triple digits for rushing yardage. So that's the way we're going to be able to fit some of these spendy guys is via, Levine. People are typically uncomfortable and they don't like putting a running back with the quarterback. I think that's kind of archaic thinking at this point. We see running backs catching passes. We see these college offenses often, maybe not so much in NFL, but these college offenses where both are eating. The passers are throwing for 303. The running backs are rushing for 150 and 2. Like these college defenses just aren't that good. And South Florida is certainly not that good. It would take I know there's some hurricanes in Southern Florida going on right now. It would take a hurricane to probably stop SMU at this point from scoring another 70 points. But the Levine show at 3-4 seems way too obvious. With that being said, be prepared for another SMU running back that I didn't even name. Like maybe what's the one kid they got? Epton, like Epton to randomly, rush it for 20 times. I don't know. But those are the 3 I'm highlighting here initially. What do you got?
I think this might be the first time that I am not interested in any of your running backs.
Good. All right. Awesome.
Makes for more interesting. Yeah, and I think that just means it's a pretty wide open running back slate. And not that I'm like not interested in Corum, but like he didn't make my top three, and that's weird because Corum is like always going to make my top three. But I just see this being an Edwards game. There's obviously Corum will get there. Corum will get his 102, and that's fine at that price point. But if Edwards gets 102 at 5.6, I think that's pretty plausible. And like one of those two might be on the ground, but like two total touchdowns, or I'm sorry, through the air, but like two total touchdowns and 100 yards rushing, which he's done 2 of the last 3 games. Not the 2 touchdowns, he did that in one of the last 3 games, but the 100 yards on the ground he's done in 2 of the last 3. I think that there's a lot of value to saving that money because like I don't see this being a 35 carry Corum game. And that's not to say he won't be extremely efficient in the 20 carries he does get, but those other carries are probably going to go mainly to Edwards, and Edwards is going to be really efficient too. So love Corum, still my boy, but I think he's not going to be necessary, and they're going to let Edwards run loose. Edwards would be my favorite running back on the slate if it weren't for Katron Allen. And it kills me that it's not Singleton that has, emerged as like the dude at Penn State, because I really want it to be Singleton. And he's been like still kind of doing his thing. Like he got 16 carries last week. So it's not like they are eliminating Singleton's role, but he's not the dude. Katron Allen was very clearly the dude when the game was, still within reason early on. 1886 and 3 to go with, only 2 catches, but 72 yards on those 2 catches. Katron Allen, obviously an explosive back. I don't know that we can expect another 35-point fantasy game, but again, 5.7, it's a heck of a lot less to pay when my focus is going to be on that extremely expensive Mordecai to Rashay Rice stack. I'm being cognizant of the fact that I don't have a lot of room to pay up for expensive top tier running backs as well. And so I've probably been bargain hunting a little bit more than I ordinarily would. Whereas typically this season I've been wanting to kind of pay up for the safety that a top tier running back does offer. And he's not going to be part of my 3, but I'll also say that if I do want to pay up for a top tier guy, it's going to be Eric Gray. And that goes back to the Dylan Gabriel kind of sort of not having great games on the road. Who has had good games on the road is Eric Gray. And so he's been just as efficient on the road and scored more touchdowns in half as many games and, been involved in the passing game, like all the stuff that you want to see be consistent when the offense travels. Eric Gray's done all of that where Dylan Gabriel hasn't. So if I find my way to a luxury spend up running back, it's probably Eric Gray over all of Gibbs, Corum, and the guy you didn't mention, Chase Brown. Just because it's a terrible WVU rush defense and also what we went over with Dylan Gabriel on the passing side. But Gray's not going to be one of my 3. Just wanted to kind of mention that. The third guy, and you glossed over this a little bit. I don't know if this is really who you're talking about. On the Iowa State side against the Oklahoma State defense that we decided is terrible and we know is terrible. Iowa State went to Cartevious Norton, true freshman. Cartevious Norton got the lion's share of the work last week against WVU, turned it into 18 carries, 69 yards, 2 touchdowns, 4 catches for 18 yards, involvement all the way around. Seems to have taken the RB1 job from the not so sure hands of Jarrell Brock, and he is priced at 3.9. So even if we don't get that full 20 carry game that we would hope for from kind of a bell cow type back, even if we get the 18 plus mixing in some passing work to get to like 21 to 22 total touches at 3.9, we're in really good shape, especially against a pretty suspect defense that will be mainly keyed on Xavier Hutchinson, right? Like they know they're going into that already double teaming a receiver on every play. There's other receivers for them to worry about too. Probably going to see very few stacked boxes, just because there's going to be so much of that defense dedicated to the passing game, and there should be room for Curtius Norton to operate. And if I can throw in like a 3B, we're going to go with Brian Batty from South Florida. Ever since Jerry Bohannon kind of turned over the reins and we're not getting 100-yard rushing games from the quarterback with Marsh, we have seen an influx in volume for Batty, and he gets the best like possible nut matchup against SMU. Running game defense has been absolutely terrible. Two most recent weeks for Batty, ran for 106 against Houston, then 129 against Temple. And then you say, okay, well, you're worried about game script. Well, he was in bad game script in both of those games and still managed to go over 100 yards, scored a couple touchdowns in one of them, caught 4 passes in one of them. Seems to be an integral part of the offense. For whatever reason, didn't get a whole bunch of work against Tulane a few weeks back, but even against Cincy, which is, a much tougher defense than SMU, 23, 82, and 1. Like there's something here. He's a substantive part of their offense, and I think that has got to be the highest total on the slate. It's 72, I think. That is, if you want a piece of that USF side that is going to have consistent volume throughout the game, it's probably going to be Batty. So he'll kind of be my 3B to Norton's 3A. So I got 4 in there, and then I guess 5 if you count Gray. So not including any of the ones you talked about. So we're on a lot of running backs. I think we're probably going to end up being on a 4 running back week the more we're talking through it.
Yeah. With Iowa State, it'll be important because Brock, they're, the carry spike there with Norton. Brock, he did get injured in that game. He's been ineffective all season. He did practice on recently. So there's talk of, maybe the freshman forced his way into more carries or a situation where they're splitting. I'm not too sure there, but there is a lot of coach speak right now about Brock being back. So something to monitor. He's cheap enough, like Jake said, to, if he gets anywhere from 10 to 15 against Oklahoma, he could easily burst, 1 through, even if he is going to split. So don't hate it. Cheap enough to take a shot at. I hate using Iowa State running backs at all this year with the state of the program there, and we'll see. So that'll be another injury news to check with. Virginia Tech has several running backs that have been banged up throughout the season. Malachi Thomas is doubtful for this one. The matchup against Duke is pretty prime. The Virginia Tech, we mentioned the total being low. There's going to be some offense coming from somewhere. I would say Keshawn King is pretty nice looking, but they have him priced at 6.3, so they kind of adjusted there too fast for my liking. But it is a spot where I think in GPP wise he's okay. Other guys to really look at, again, I mentioned Pratt, Tyjae Spears going against UCF. Their rush defense has been fairly solid this year, so it's a tougher spot. Spears does get receiving work. He's still just priced, he's a little higher than he's been at 6.5, but still in that nice range. He's been super effective. We were all kind of pissed last week. He got, 157 yards and a touchdown, so we couldn't be pissed about that. But the fact that it was just 14 carries instead of like 20 to 25, he should have certainly gotten more work, or at least, DFSers like ourselves thought so. 3 straight games over 125 yards, definitely playing well. I think at this point he's become an earned the matchup proof tag, somebody to definitely continue to consider. Other guys to really look at here, going up against Louisville defense, we have Will Shipley, who is priced in that range of 6-7 where he's been. He's kind of dialed in lately to like 15 to 20 fantasy points. He gets really decent receiving work. There's not a lot of yardage there. He gets a ton of 1 to 3 yard receptions, which obviously, big deal, but PPR scoring, give me the 5 to 6 receptions. I'll take those 6. And then hopefully he's going to score a touchdown or 2 along the way. He did have over 100 yards in 2 of his last 3, but yes, really that team struggled against Notre Dame. I don't see them struggling offensively against Louisville and that kind of suspect defense in their own right. So I think Shipley bounces back nicely here at 6-7, somebody to look at. Another kind of expensive guy, Rocket Sanders at 7-1. If KJ is banged up, man, he's going to get a boatload of carries. I know Hornsby is a rusher as well, but Rocket's just been super good. The Liberty game was a disaster for multiple of them, but I expect him to get back to rushing for over 100 yards in this matchup against LSU and what I would expect to be kind of a higher scoring game. So that's another guy to look at that's kind of on the higher price side. I like the group that you come up with. It sounds like, we're coming at the slate at different angles, which can be a good thing or it can be a scary thing. Another guy to look at here that's kind of on the cheap side, if we know Donaldson's out, if we don't want to trust JT Daniels, then Tony Mathis sits there at 5K in this really quite good matchup. He's a guy that I think will kind of get – is he out too, actually? Let me double check. Well, that was last week. So we'll have to check on his status. If he plays, I just saw a tweet about that. If he plays, then that's good. Otherwise, it looks like we're down to Johnson, who's only 4.6. He had 12 carries last week for 50 yards. So that's another bit of injury news we'll have to check. But Justin Johnson at 4.6. He's had some actually pretty decent games earlier in the season, and he hit a stretch of 3 straight games over double-digit fantasy points, Virginia Tech, Baylor, and Texas. Does catch the ball a little bit, scores touchdowns on both sides. So again, just a matchup spot where I want to take whoever I can against Oklahoma. West Virginia's not really that good of a team. I'm a little uncomfortable with them, but tracking the news, luckily that game and the Arkansas game, Virginia Tech injuries, like all those games start right at lock. So, or right in they're the first games of lock. So we'll have a lot of that injury news at our disposal. Whereas, Iowa State, injury news, Spencer Sanders injury news, that'll be later in the slate. Who are some other running backs that you like? Because, I think it's definitely shaping up to be a 4 running back slate, but it's not as a slam dunk as last week where it was a really obvious, like for me, it was an obvious 4. And I was really kind of going back and forth about them. And then, some injuries happened and the decision became way easier. This week, I don't feel as dialed in with the ones I really want to play, but there are some other options out there. Who are some that you're looking at?
I think you kind of mentioned him in passing, but Harvey, he's gone up in price a little bit, and he was a kind of sneak guy that I mentioned last week, and put up a decent showing, 17,151 at 4.8. A lot of people are happy that if you're paying like 7K for running back, right? So he's up to 54, which takes a little bit of that sheen off of him, and I do think that Tulane's a little bit tougher against the run. So not as excited about it, but the volume was certainly there. Even with Bowser, being involved, like Bowser had 15 carries himself, but Harvey was clearly the better back. Right. So I think that's still in play. I'm not as enthusiastic about it being a sneak play as I was last week. And then I don't know, is it worth like getting into the Notre Dame Navy game at all for running
man
back?
It's tough on both sides. Like there's just it's like the super committee backs versus the ultra supreme committee backs. I don't know.
Yeah, like I feel like someone's gonna do something from that running game on both sides, but good luck trying to peg it. Don't know exactly who it's going to end up being.
And Tyree, who I came into the season feeling like, man, he's the guy this year. He's finally, paid his dues, and that's what the coaches said. And then he's RB3 now because Estime is getting 18 to 20 lately, and Logan Diggs has suddenly become the most consistent of the 3 and getting the most touches, and he's only
at 4,500, Logan Diggs, you would think would be kind of in play, but most touches, he's still, usually if you're getting like 20 plus touches, like you're kind of the dude, but they just run so much that it's like, yeah, he's getting the volume, but there's not a ton of efficiency, and it might not be the one that's carrying it when they're at the goal line, and that's what you really want, right? So it's a tough game to peg, but I think there will be some rushing goodness that comes out of it.
And then lastly, the only real guy or I guess team dimension would be the Ole Miss, guys. Quinshon Judkins, his price continues to crawl up. It's like 6'4", 6'8", 6'8", 6'7". Now it's 7K, 205 yards in the last game that he played on 34 carries against Texas A&M. Is there anything this 3-star, they obviously mismarked him, you can't do? He scored a touchdown in every single game except one, which was back in week 2 when he only needed 10 carries for 100 yards against Central Arkansas. So he gets a pass for not scoring there. I know it's Alabama, but I'm truly not worried about him against anyone right now, and I'm not worried about Alabama. Zach Evans, he's still producing and scoring himself, but Judkins just getting all the work. And it's like, again, Evans just, I guess he's being saved for the pros. I think he's going to end up being a pretty decent prospect, but he's only 6'1", and if you would have told me like a year ago that I'd be, talking about Zach Evans being 6'1", and regardless of matchup, not that interested, I would have told you were on drugs or you were drunk. And here we are in 2022 and 6'1". It's like, that's a nice price for Zach Evans, but shit, this Judkins kid just keeps on punching it in, and he keeps on getting the volume. Zach Evans is going to get his, 11 carries, 80 yards and a touchdown. Like, that's fine. But then Judkins going to get 30 carries and he just keeps impressing every week. Just when I think he's hit his cap for impressing me, he goes out and rushes for 205 against Texas A&M, who defensively is not a sieve of a defense. So I'm probably not going to play him, but he's going to post 25 plus fantasy points, and I'm just going to sit there like, I should have taken those easy points and I didn't. But yeah, moving on, we have the wide receiver spot. This is one, you've mentioned Rice, paying up for Rice. That's going to be a smart move. There's a lot of key guys here. Hutchinson, you've got the Ohio State guys, you got Marvin Mims if you want to go on that journey. Charlie Jones is on the slate. He's always been a sure-handed guy. And a couple of other guys in the mid-range, which I'm kind of feeling. So I might be going a little different than you on some of my receivers here. But you start us off and let us know.
Yeah, so I mean, Rice is the obvious play, and I think you and I both do this when we do our write-ups. But like SMU is a receiver room that you kind of have to talk about in the aggregate, just because Rice is the alpha, and like, yes, obvious pairing partner, but like everyone knows that, so you're not really telling anybody anything. The part where it gets more interesting is that like no one else is expensive and a lot of dudes are hurt, right? And so Jake Bailey, who would have been like the Robin to Rice's Batman all season, he's been hurt. Bo Corrales, the transfer, he's hurt. I think they're both done for the season, right? So like they're not.
Bailey was lost early. And then we were all excited about him too. It's a damn change. But
yeah. And so like then everyone's like, oh, Moochie Dixon, he's the next highest priced guy. He's probably going to be pretty good. Moochie Dixon is like a flash in a pan guy. Like if you just look at game logs, okay, yeah, he puts up like a little bit every week, but it's one catch, and the catch either goes for a touchdown or it doesn't. And when he was like 3.2, that was kind of acceptable. Like you could stomach that risk at 3.2. At 5.1, I do not care for Moochie Dixon one bit. There's a bunch of dudes that are interesting that are that showed up in that ridiculous 10 touchdown game out of nowhere that probably won't get that kind of end zone volume. But like, what's Ben Redding? Who's a Ben Redding? That's not even a dude that was on my radar at all. He shows as out now, so like don't play him obviously. But his line,
they've had bad luck with injuries. That's their third guy out for the year. It's nuts.
424-3 from a guy that like I had not heard of previously to him putting up that week, right? And so like he's not any of these guys can flash is kind of my point. The guy that I'm probably most interested in actually flashing is Russell Maryland. He's in the player pool as RJ Maryland. Last 2 weeks, so not just the Houston game where everybody did everything, but also the Cincinnati game where that's a real defense. He went 535-1, and so that's at least more consistent, right? And he's a tight end, so he's gonna be on the field probably a little more than the receivers that they kind of run through. The guy that's gonna be kind of the ultimate boom bust is Goffney, who's at 3K. He has 2 good games. They are against Navy and they're against Houston. USF has a defense that is similar to Navy and Houston in that it is not good and it cannot stop vertical passing game, and that's what Goffney does. So Goffney is 3K. He has the right matchup. It's going to be via long touchdowns that he does damage. In each of those games, it was a 40+ yard touchdown that he got. If you get a 40-yard plus touchdown at 3K, you're already off to a really good start. So I am going to be pairing Mordecai with Rice and at least one other option. It probably is Maryland or Goffney. It probably won't be all 3 of those. And if it is, the rest of the lineup is USF guys, because that's like just, well, we're going to game stack that at that point if you're doing 3 pass catchers. And I don't know that that's necessarily a bad move, because look, if you did that against Houston, you won everything, right? If they were on the slate, right? Like if you had Houston comebacks and Mordecai plus 3 of his pass catchers, like no one is beating you. It doesn't matter what else you did. So if you are playing it for a GPP purpose, Rice plus 1 at minimum, possibly 2. And Maryland and Goffney are the guys that I'm most interested in from that. What I wouldn't do is throw Maryland and Goffney in as one-offs of lineups where you are not playing a whole bunch of other SMU and USF guys, because what's going to happen with that is at the end of the day, you're going to be like, oh, this guy Goffney sucks. And he caught 1 pass for 12 yards. And it's like, well, yeah, like he's 3K. You're expecting boom or bust to happen from him. This is not a guy that sees 8 to 12 underneath targets. Maryland is a little bit more of that guy, and so if you were going to play a one-off that is not Rashay Rice, I probably would be a little bit more inclined to have that guy be Maryland. So, all of that to say, my first of the 3 is Rashay Rice, and those are my thoughts on the rest of the SMU wide receiver room, which should be very popular on this slate. Next guy, and you stole Blake Corum from me. I'm going to steal one from you. Last week was Ramel Keaton week, and you've been waiting for it all season.
Mm-hmm.
And he got Tennessee Martin, and he went 577-2. What you mentioned earlier was true. Hendon Hooker is going to want to take out some frustration after playing in Alabama. Missouri is a great team to do that against. Hendon Hooker tends to spread the ball around. Ramel Keaton's 4,500 and has seen a good amount of volume. 5 catches for 78 yards against Bama. 5 catches for 77 yards against Tennessee Martin. 2 of them
that game wasn't on the slate.
Right? Yeah, no. Walt would have been all over that because we've been talking about Ramel Keaton since the preview show.
Going into it, there was talk that Tennessee Martin might keep it close, betting wise, keep it close. And I remember I was talking in the Discord, like, well, I don't know why people are saying that, but yeah, I don't know, man.
Yeah. And so obviously you didn't do anything against Georgia because nobody did anything against Georgia. But I think I think that we might get another Ramel Keaton game. With the pissed off Hendon Hooker spreading the ball around, and I think we might get over that 100-yard threshold too. So that I think qualifies as sneak play. I don't think there are going to be very many people at all on Ramel Keaton. So for as chalk as I've been with the Mordecai and Rice calls, I think we're going to go a little bit off the board with that one. Also, probably will be a little bit.
He had
off.
0 targets, by the way, against Georgia. 0 targets, and 1 against Kentucky.
Well, is that a charting thing though? Because Hendon Hooker just didn't throw it near a receiver, or did he actually not see the field?
That's just on PFF. Oh, he had snaps, but he didn't get targeted.
Well, Hendon Hooker had a rough day.
Yeah, he did.
He did. But it's much easier sledding against Missouri. So I think that's going to be. Everyone might look to pair him with Hyatt or Tillman, and those are fine things to do as well. But I'm not looking to pay that kind of premium with the other things I'm looking to do with the lineup. So that's another one. And then surprise, surprise, the last one of the 3 is going to be another USF bring back, Xavier Weaver.
Yes.
We got him extremely involved in the offense consistently all season. Not fewer than 5 catches in all but one of his games. Hasn't seen the end zone a ton on the season. However, his 5 touchdowns have all been in the last 4 games. 2 against Cincy, which is obviously a much tougher defense, as we mentioned a few times here, and then 2 against Temple in negative game. Actually, both of those games in negative game scripts, and so he is targeted when they are trailing. And if you are not going to play Batty, or even if you are going to play Batty and just think that USF will be able to kind of go punch for punch with SMU, Batty and or Weaver, but in particular Weaver against an SMU defense that will be on the field a lot because their offense will be scoring so quickly. I think at 5'9", Xavier Weaver is a really nice bring back. He also, I assume, let me just verify, or if you have it pulled up, I assume he's probably the most heavily targeted receiver in that offense. I can't imagine anybody's getting more.
Most definitely. They have no other consistent. We even earlier in the season when they were on the slate, we even tried to speculate on that, and it's all Weaver, all the time.
Yeah, most recent game against Temple, nobody else had more than 2 catches or 19 yards, and he's in there with 6, 119, and 2. Right. So that's probably the dude.
So real quick, 82 targets. The next closest is Jimmy Horn with 38. Nobody else above 20.
Nobody else is close. Yeah. Okay, yes. So comfortably the bring back of choice in that offense. And so those will be my long-winded 3: Rashae Rice, Ramel Keaton, and Xavier Weaver. And I'm as much as I do want to use my Ohio State guys, I will save that for the chop it up talk at the end.
Okay, I was gonna say if you're not using them at all, that'll be the second week in a row where you didn't really have much interest. So I'll be looking forward to that. All right, so many different ways to go at wide receiver. There's some clear pay ups, some good mid range. I like that you called out Weaver there because he's definitely somebody that kind of stuck out to me at that range, and then of course speculating on cheapies. Now I will be transparent and say I don't have a guy that I feel as confident as I was last week in Jalen Tyson. Like that was just a play that I felt really, really good about, and I was going to ride it regardless of how it played out. Xavier Hutchinson, of course, at 8.3, the obvious choice there. I'm wondering if people are going to try to stuff him with Rice because as far as, single entry stuff goes, Hutchinson, very few better than him. He's over 100 targets. However, I kind of want to look to these other guys because you mentioned, Oklahoma State, they're going to try to be paying attention to Hutchinson. Not that they will probably be able to do anything there, but I think there's going to be enough volume here spread around and they'll be able to run on them. They'll be able to score some points. And I think this is a game where Deckers is going to feel comfortable in dissecting them a little bit. So that brings me to guys like Jalen Noel, who sits there at 4.9. maybe a little higher than I want to pay. And then a guy down here that's more in that, speculative range of 3.8 with Dimitri Staniel, former Colorado guy. Maybe we've got a theme going here from last week to this week, only 3 catches for 19 yards last week, but before that he had 6 for 90, 5 for 44, 5 for 81. So he's had some pretty quality games here sitting at the 3.8 price. And he's kind of bounced from low 3 to mid 4s. They've got him kind of all over the place here, but 3.8 settling in there. Somebody who is definitely getting targeted between, he's kind of that WR2 sometime, WR3. Noel was a kind of a non-factor last game. He's third on the team in targets with 44, but he's played one less game. The touchdown volume hasn't been there, but looking at his target share since he's kind of come on the last 3 or 4 weeks, 6 targets last week, 8 the week before, 5, 5, 8, 6, 5, and 1. So definitely seeing a pretty decent target share there, anywhere from 5 to 8 at 3.8. Somebody that, we need a little bit of savings perhaps. I want a piece of this Iowa State game. I don't, if I'm playing Rice, I'm playing a high price running back perhaps, depending on what kind of lineup you want to build. You're not really going to be able to fit Hutchinson. You can't sit here and be one of those, not specifically pointing to anyone in the industry, so I hope they don't take it that way. But I'm not going to be one of those shows that's like, we're going to play this guy, and we're not going to worry about salary. It's like, oh, thanks. I'm 38,000 over the cap, but all right. That's great. Thanks for the help. So I don't want to be that guy, but I want a piece of this offense, and Hutchinson's probably not going to make it on the roster. And that scares me because if Hutchinson ends up being lower on, then he's going to just cook the hell out of Oklahoma State to a crisp and go for like 15, 200 into some crazy game. So I might have to get some alt builds going this week so I can get some exposure. But I mean, 100 plus yards in 4 of his last 5, you don't get a safer play than Xavier Hutchinson right now. And Rice is pretty damn safe. But if I had to put like a lot, like $1 million for 100 and a touchdown, between those two, I honestly, I think I'm probably going Hutchinson, even though I think, Rice will hit that number too. But I want to get, probably Dimitri Stanley or Noel. And I'm looking at Stanley quite a bit here at 3.8 and thinking that I might go that direction because I'm like you, really nervous about everyone on SMU besides Rice. I did notice Goffney and thought, wow, 3K, he's going to be a popular play. People are going to be throwing him in because 3K, whenever there's a 3K special, that's just, there's a lot of industry talk about this guy being so exciting. And I can see that happening here Saturday morning. It's going to be a lot of Goffney stuff. But it could be Upshaw, could be Maryland, Curley's still in the mix. There's just so many different targets. So I'm really kind of nervous about that. I've done Rice. So the cheap option there could perhaps be Dimitri Stanley. Other guys to really, look at kind of staying in that cheap area. Arkansas. Now this is going to be quarterback, dependent because if Hornsby comes in, there's not going to be as much passing volume necessarily. When he played against Mississippi State through 17 times, he did have 234 yards and he was throwing some long ones. Like he had a 70-yard completion. He was picked off twice on 2 long balls. Like he was looking to throw the ball down the field. Granted, it was a script that called for it. But at this point, Matt Landers is somebody I think we have to start talking about as kind of a reliable pass catcher. His price has caught up to that production a little bit, but not all the way. Sitting there at 5K, one of those mid-range guys, had a really great game against BYU. The first few games of the season, leading up to that BYU game, he had 1 game over 100 yards, and it was like, okay, this is a blip. But he followed it up with 4 for 115 against Auburn, and then he was one of the few Arkansas guys that performed last week, 6 for 119. So the target shares are going there. They're catchable balls. He's catching long passes as well, but there's also a fair amount of targets happening there for him. And LSU's defense has already been proven to be a paper tiger. Earlier in the season, they were shutting guys out, and I was a little leery about them and targeting them, and that was quickly, torn to shreds by Hendon Hooker and company, and LSU is just a team that we don't have to be fearful of. As you mentioned, you want to play the letdown, angle here from LSU. Matt Landers could really make that defense pay if they fall asleep napping and he gets behind the defense. He will take a long one. So another guy there at 5K that I want to look at. I love the Keaton, call. He's just that man. The last 2 games, Kentucky and Georgia has just not been it for him, but they've been bad matchups, right? So nobody's going to be on him. So I love that. I was being the fish and looking at Seti Tillman there at 6'5" because, man, he's been so good to us. He's been damn near 9K at times this season. It's just like, man, he's back. Is he healthy? Is he good to go? He's had 2 real brutal matchups, Kentucky and Georgia. He's kind of produced a little bit in them, 11 receptions, over 100 yards combined. There's a big game brewing here for him. I think that the Jalen Hyatt experience is going to start kind of coming back down to earth a little bit. Hyatt's been great, but I think that Tillman's, to me, he's the better receiver, and I think we see that target share switch there. So I'm kind of liking the Tillman play there at 6.5, but I don't think I'm going to have the salary to play him. So I'm going to have to keep going in the cheap region here and really looking elsewhere. There is a guy, if you want to play him and you want to chase a little bit, and and he's 4-1, so it's a little more expensive, but Samir Hagens for Duke. If you're playing Riley Leonard and you're one of those guys, and I'm not talking smack, but you're like, I've got to have a pairing partner. I got to have someone for my quarterback. Samir Hagens could be that guy, back-to-back games with a touchdown that he's played. He had some games where he was not targeted, so be very careful with him. But he's hot right now in the Boston College game, 5 for 45 and a touchdown. So somebody that I'm seeing being talked about a little bit. Calhoun is in Pankow, and those guys are more well-known commodities. Even Nicky Dalmolin, he's been kind of hit or miss, but he's been targeted. But it looks like Hagens is somebody at 4-1 that GPP wise you can look at. Now we're basically going into the kind of the spitball period here, and I don't really have a clear cut top 3. That's why the wide receiver is for me. But I think between Landers, Dimitri Stanley, those are 2. I've given you a couple of other names here that I'm kind of waffling on. I think the third though is going to be Juice, if I can call him that. Juice Williams. He's not the real Juice Williams, of course, but he's been playing well for Illinois. Now it's $6K, again, another tough price, but Purdue's secondary, I noticed before the Nebraska game that Purdue's just, they're putting up a lot of points. That's great, but they're just getting trashed in the secondary. And even when, they're not scoring in droves, or they're having some dead periods, they're still just getting totally trashed. And of course, like a top 1% happened for me. Trey Palmer went for 55 fantasy points or some crazy number. Like, that won't happen again. And I'm not saying it will, but it just kind of showed how this Purdue secondary is played. Going up against Wisconsin, Skylar Bell, the youngster who I like, he had a touchdown over 80 yards. Iowa last week, we know, Caleb Johnson, the running back, rushed for 200. That kind of came out of nowhere. But Sam Laporta kind of showed up with 70 yards and a touch. Nico Regani, 56 yards and a touch. Like, Iowa passing offense was looking good against Purdue. And there's been quite a few offenses that have done well. So I think this is a game where we could see, Williams with another like 5 for, 90 to 100 yards, maybe even more, a couple of touchdowns. He's had 15 plus fantasy points in his last 3. 4 of his last 5, he's been in double digits. 9 for 62, 9 for 93, and 5 for 98. They do try to give him carries at times, but just a versatile weapon. So much is talked about and paid attention to Chase Brown, as it should be, but that versatility of Williams and just his ability to just hit home runs, at will, makes the defense keeps them on their toes. But the element of Chase Brown has to keep them in so they don't get gashed there. And then he gets behind somebody, it's just game over because of how fast he is. So another guy in that mid-range, if I can't see myself paying up, or I'm finding myself with that last guy in that, typical 5 to 6K range, I think Isaiah Williams is somebody that we can look at and won't see a lot of ownership because people haven't quite caught on to the DVP that is against Purdue. They're no good defensively. So it's kind of unclear at receiver after SMU. I know you've got some line in the sand plays, which I like hearing that, but tell us about Ohio State and some of the other ones you're looking at. Cause I think it's definitely a multi-entry slate. I think there's very few where I'm like, yes, I'm all in on that guy like we were last week. So I'm a little nervous in that regard.
Yeah. And it's kind of one of those things. It's almost like you have to look at these as individual showdown type games and like find the narrative that makes sense and then play the players that are, akin to that narrative. And so the narrative that I'm going for with Ohio State is they ran Mayan Williams into the ground last week, and they probably aren't getting Travion Henderson back. I don't know that we're going to see Travion Henderson again until like the Big Ten championship. They have no reason to play him against Indiana. He is talented, and he's probably more talented than Mayan Williams, but Mayan Williams is fine. and showed that and single-handedly got them a victory. Like that game was in question at halftime against Northwestern. That's ridiculous, right? But just goes to show you sometimes weather can be the great equalizer. I don't think we're going to get the same kind of weather in this one, and Indiana just has no shot. So it's really a matter of what Ryan Day wants to do and whether it's, more important to get carries to Dallin Hayden and Chip Trainum, or whether it's more important to build CJ Stroud's confidence back up after probably the worst game CJ Stroud has played in any level of football in his career. I think it's probably more important to get CJ Stroud's confidence back up. And you do that with the Rose Bowl game. Like go play the Rose Bowl game again. You're not going to have JSN because JSN's probably also not going to play until the Big Ten championship game, if he plays then either. And it's disappointing we didn't get to see him this year, man. I feel like I say that every week, but it just is because there's so much talent there. And we'll get to see him plenty on Sundays, but I don't know that there's going to be much college career left for him. But that said, Harrison, McBuka, Fleming, I'm probably, if I'm doing that, Mordecai and Rice become Stroud and Harrison, and everything else just kind of fits into place, other than I'm not running back with anyone on the Indiana side. This is going to be like, Ohio State just onslaught. They're going to have the ball a ton. They're going to do whatever they want with the ball. They're going to score quickly. They're going to get the ball back. They're going to score quickly again. And it's, yes, Igbuka's there too. Yes, Fleming's there too. Harrison is CJ Stroud's guy. I think that's pretty clear at this point. When Harrison's been healthy, he's kind of been the guy. So I would also, if you're going all in on CJ Stroud, I would have interest in pairing with multiple. If you can get to both of Harrison and Igbuka, great. Probably aren't going to do that. You probably are going to get to something more like Harrison and Fleming or Harrison and Stover, or if you're not going with Harrison, Igbuka and Fleming, or Igbuka and Stover, but Stroud plus one or two pass catchers, probably not going to go all three, just because, passing game isn't quite as diverse and voluminous. Although if you're playing this narrative, it could be interesting to go all three. It's just there's no one you can really run back with on Indiana, and I would be very, very hesitant to throw three receivers into a lineup where I have no run backs. It's just antithetical to the way I create DFS lineups. So Stroud plus one and maybe two of his pass catchers is how I'm going to play that. We didn't talk about Mayan Williams at all. And I think Mayan Williams will probably have like a 85-yard and one touchdown type game, which is not great at the $7,300 price point. And he gets like no involvement in the passing game. So I think we were correct in not getting into Mayan Williams too much. But I do think that these Ohio State pass catchers blow up. And if you want to rotate through who you have the most exposure to in multiple entry type stuff, it is a spot that I think blows up, and probably at lower ownership than it ordinarily would, because everyone's like, well, that game's going to blow out and no one's going to reach their ceiling. But I think there's a lot of narrative in this one to keep the foot on the gas a little bit longer than they might otherwise would.
I like it. I'll talk a little bit about Penn State wide receivers. The running backs, of course, they're electric. I've kind of, banged that drum on against Maryland. They haven't really been on the slate as often as we would have expected, but early in the season, 3 of their first 4 games, I mean, they just got cooked by the likes of, Tanner Mordecai for a big game. Charlotte guys, combined they played like three guys at quarterback, but they all threw for a combined 3 touchdowns and multiple, 200 plus yards. JJ McCarthy threw for 220 and 2. And for him, that's pretty solid. And I think, and Aiden O'Connell cooked them. Indiana had a really good, Basilic almost threw for 300. Their last 2 have been against Northwestern and Wisconsin, not really prolific passing offenses. So they look better than they were. Everybody always focuses on this running game. We saw, Sean Clifford, what was it, a couple of weeks ago? He threw for 371 and 3. The game before that, 295 and 4. Kind of foot off the gas last week against Indiana. Might we see him have to, compete with this Maryland offense? Their defense is freaking amazing. I don't think Maryland will have an easy time scoring very often. We could see a little bit of Drew Allaire there, but I don't care. Between those two, I think, they'll be adequate enough to find guys like Parker Washington, Mitchell Tinsley. Parker Washington was a guy that you had a great call on PrizePicks, and it's funny because it was the week that you missed the show. You were out of country, I think, and I actually had brought him up as a play. Like the extent was, he hasn't played well this season. Nobody talks about him. He was thought to be like the next man up with Dotson gone, and this would be the game he would blow up. He didn't make my main lineup or anything, but he blew up, and I think people are still kind of sleeping on him. The price is steep at 6.7. It's going to be hard to fit him, but GPP wise, again, you can go back to him even knowing, it's a rarity to be able to say like this guy scored 20 plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 3. But he's not going to be that owned because typically you've got, your casual box score chasers, you've got, totals and stuff of that nature and figure, he's going to be owned, but he's not going to draw very much ownership. And it's a great spot for him. And Tinsley is there and as a second guy, and he's been kind of the PPR role where Washington's, breaking these big plays. Lambert Smith is there. Their tight end Strange has been okay. But I think Parker Washington has an opportunity to have his third, 100 or his third double-digit fantasy game in his last 4, whether that's like 7 for 100 and a touch or 6 for 150 and 2 touches. I just think he's going to have a really nice outing here against Maryland. And again, nobody's going to be looking at him. So that's another guy that I would like to look at. There are some injuries for the Clemson side at receiver, I believe, with Collins. They're all cheap if you want to go that direction. DJ, he seems to like Davis Allen a good amount, but it's really hard to peg when that'll be. Sometimes he'll hit him for 10 targets. Sometimes he'll hit him for 2 targets. But at 3.7, he's kind of an intriguing GPP play that, again, is not going to be that highly owned. Just kind of throwing some names out there for GPPs because I know we got guys who do the MME thing. And then on the Tulane side, all of their guys are cheap. We've seen Day-Day McDougal have some pretty fantasy relevant games. We've seen him disappear as well. I think that Tulane is going to score some points here. Tyreek James at 4.5. He's been a good source of touchdowns, 3 in his last 5. And then, of course, Deuce Watt sitting there at 5.3 is another guy that's scored 4 touchdowns in his last 5. Had a nice stretch there where he scored every single game and has been scoring at least 6 fantasy points in every single game since week 4. So just a couple of GPP looks. This really does feel like a multi-enter slate because I think we're going to end up playing some guys that we're not super comfy with in our main build. And that leads me to believe I'm probably going to run 4 running backs because I tend to trust them a little bit more. Before we move to PrizePicks, our core and all that, is there any other wide receivers? Like, we didn't even really talk about Charlie Jones. He's playing Illinois. Like, it wouldn't surprise us if he went off, but he's 8-1. Where are we going to fit him? I mean, is there any other guys like that or sneaks?
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered everyone that I've got a whole lot of interest in.
Cool. Yeah. It's crazy because like this feels like the college basketball slate we had today, like at receiver. Like there's so many guys at the 7K plus who are like, yeah, like they're good, but how am I going to fit them? All right. So as it stands right now, who's your 3-man core?
So gonna be pretty chalky with 2 of them. Mordecai and Rice are the QB and receiver. Running back, I'm gonna go Donovan Edwards. So probably a little bit off the board there. Save a little bit of money, in that mid tier at running back. So Mordecai, Edwards, and Rashae Rice.
Edwards, love it, live it. Yeah, I think it's pretty, Mordecai, definitely. I will go just to be different at this moment and kind of have my GPP, core, I guess. Riley Leonard, I will go there just to be slightly different. At running back, I'm definitely looking to pay up. I'll say Jahmyr Gibbs just because you're convincing me on the Edwards here. I want one of Gibbs or Corm in my lineup, so I'm gonna make that happen. May end up being the wrong play, but I like the matchups for them too much. And then the core for wide receiver, I'm just gonna say Dimitri Stanley. I'm gonna need some value at the lineup I want to make. Do I want to try my luck with another, albeit former Colorado receiver? Go for two for two this week. We're gonna give it a shot. So Dimitri Stanley is the core wide receiver for me. But yes, in your main build, Mordecai and Rice probably need to go into your lineup after last week, and their encore against USF won't be as good, but it'll still be good. And if it's a letdown is 500 or 405 for Mordecai, then let us be let down. All right. PrizePicks on the move here. We're going to go to, we've had PrizePicks, it's been a heater for college sports. So let's get in here and pull up some. I know you've already probably got some in. The numbers may have changed. Do you have any handy or that you're looking at that you want to kind of reference first?
Yeah. So the first one that I put in, I put this in on Monday when the PrizePicks numbers first came out, and couple of them have changed so far, but they're not unreasonable at this point. It was, and I'll just give you the full four that I did together. And it was a stack of the North Carolina and Wake Forest passing games. So Drake May over 32.5 fantasy points. That's gone up to 33.5. Still very viable. Sam Hartman over 325.5 passing yards. That I believe is still the same. Josh Downs over 90.5 receiving yards. A.T. Perry over 70.5 receiving yards. I think that one's gone up to 80. All of that is fine. You could put those quarterbacks at 400 and those receivers at 100, and I would still be taking the overs. That game is absolutely ridiculous. Like just the most offensive environment. Like I take that back. SMU is not involved in the game, so it's not the most offensive environment possible. I think SMU UNC would be like the thing that breaks overs. Like
every record.
SMU UNC would like. Would you put like an 80? Would you put a 90 total on SMU UNC?
I think so, because they might have a better chance of stopping each other if they put like cardboard cutouts on the defense and cemented them in the ground. They might have a better chance to stop them. But yeah, 90 sounds pretty fair, actually.
Yeah, I'm all about the passing. Each of those passing games. Obviously, Drake May, I went with the fantasy points because he does get a good amount of his fantasy value on the ground. Hartman does too, to a certain degree, but we still see a lot of passing volume from him pretty consistently. So those were the first four that I went to. I think we get Connor Weigman back, so I also am very bullish on Texas A&M receiver overs. Got Evan Stewart at 66.5. Let's just see what he's at now. He's still there. So you can still get Evan Stewart at 66.5, get Moose at 60 or 60.5 rather. Interested in both of those so far. I've only done the Evan Stewart, but might throw Moose in some as well. And then the other game that I completely stacked up was the Washington Oregon game. So that is Penix over 320.5 passing yards, Rome over 91.5, Jalen McMillan over 62.5, and Bo Nix over 33.5, which I believe is now gone up to 34.5. Bo Nix is going to have 50 points, so 34.5 is no problem. So yes, that one did go up to 34.5. So a lot of correlated plays have kind of stood out to me so far with these higher total type games. As far as games that are on the slate that we just talked about, hadn't been on like until today really. Like the games on our slate hadn't really had much to choose from, and there's still not a ton. So I think we see that come out a little bit more. as it goes on. But I think the Tennessee passing game overs. I mean, obviously we like Ramel Keaton, but Tillman and Hyatt at 5.5, Tillman at 5. I think pretty comfortably can get to both of those overs. Probably don't take them in the same lineup, but if you're pairing Hooker with one of those two, that makes a lot of sense. Hooker at 275.5. I think after the frustrating game he had against Georgia, maybe in the PrizePicks algorithm they're bringing him down a little bit because of that performance against Georgia, but this is not Georgia that he's going to be playing against, on Saturday. So Hooker over 275.5, I would have a lot of interest in. And then let's see, is there anybody else that really stood out? I want to actually take a Chase Brown under, and that's rare. But they're going so high on Chase Brown every single week, and he's hitting it. So I get it, but 140.5 in what is probably going to be a little bit more of a game where they need to pass than typical. I think that's probably a little bit high. And what you said with Juice Williams kind of being pretty efficient, might have to go there a little bit more than they typically want to. So pains me to do it because I love him, but Chase Brown under 140.5 rushing yards is the only one I'll add that's been on the slate that we were just talking about.
Like it. All right. So yeah, there's this kind of a light board. You're right. Looks like because of the weekday football, they've been focusing on that. So my first one is maybe a little oddball, but I'm really leaning into that Purdue, secondary being bad. I like it. Kind of correlates with what you said about Chase Brown. They've just made his total. It's not like he probably won't hit 100, but they're just making his total rushing yards so high at this point that there's just not a lot of value on the over anymore. Tommy DeVito's combined passing and rushing is 203.5. Now, he doesn't have a ton of rushing opportunities all the time, but it's definitely possible. But just getting that added element and all I need him to do is throw for 205 and get there. He might get sacked and lose like 10 yards. That is a real possibility. But, I think he could get 30 rushing yards like he did against Nebraska, 180 to 200 passing yards. Like, that seems pretty advantageous to me. And lately he's been getting slept on. And I think this is a matchup that he's going to do quite well in. And 203.5 combined, it feels a little bit too low to me. I like Max Duggan's, sticking with that category, pass plus rushing yards. Max, Hacksaw, 290.5. Texas defense, I'm not afraid of. I think this will, everybody every week's waiting for TCU letdown game and Hacksaw to let down. And he's not a typical rusher all the time, but he's proven himself capable, and he's got an offense that he's got masterful control of. We know Texas will score. We know TCU will score. So 300 plus out of him combo seems pretty inevitable. Yes, on Washington, Oregon, whatever the prop is, it's probably going over. Like, they've got Bo Nix combined 310.5. They've got, he's going to do all the damage. I'm not like looking at Troy Franklin and guys like that though, because I don't trust them, even though one of those receivers will come out and go nuts. All of the Washington guys that you mentioned, McMillan, Rome, and Penix, like, those are locks. I see no way those don't hit. Oregon secondary is already trash. We know that. There's a reason we were on Tyson last week. Huskies passing game is phenomenal. They also can't stop anyone on defense, so the points scored in that game is going to be nuts. Tony Mathis, if he does play, they've got him pretty low across the board against Oklahoma. Like, his fantasy points are 11.5. So clearly we need to make sure that he's playing, but I like that. Let me just double check here. His rushing yards were 62.5. Johnson will get looks as well, but this Oklahoma defense is not the truth. So Mathis without Donaldson, healthy, if he's going to get 15 plus carries, that 62.5 doesn't seem very safe to me. I think that's an over more often than not. Chris Rodriguez going against, Vanderbilt. Kentucky's the last couple of games. A big season was expected out of them. There was talk of them threatening to, be in the mix for an SEC title, at least for a little while. That hasn't really come to fruition and worked out. They kind of struggled against Missouri, but, C-Rod had 112 against them last week. They got completely embarrassed against Tennessee. That was a really rough outing for them. 98 yards for him in that one. Mississippi State, who rushing defense has been really bad. We have identified that as a DVP. He had almost 200. So I'm riding that one. They've got him at a 105.5 against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's giving up a roughly 151 yards per game on the ground. I think we see Kentucky get back to the ground and pound game here and really just run him, 25 plus times and just allow him to chew up clock yardage and get a nice easy win for Kentucky. So 105.5 rushing yards for Chris Rodriguez, I'm definitely in on. And then you look at his fantasy total, they have it at 16.5. If he rushes for over 100, he's basically going to score and coach into 20. So I'm going to be taking both of those in, various stages of my parlays. But I'm a big Chris Rodriguez guy. When he was announced out for the first couple, I was super high on Jutane McClain. He never got to play because he got injured in camp early, and then they just didn't run the ball that much. Now Rodriguez is back. He owns the world in Kentucky, and I'm just loving life with him right now. So taking him. And then there's one I'm going to get debated on, if you will, and it's Aiden O'Connell, because I know this Illinois defense is really quite good, but AOC, the real AOC, right? He throws the ball a lot, and they've got him at 240.5, and I don't think that's going to go under. That's tough for me to get away from. I mean, I guess we can look to the the Iowa game, where he threw 43 times, which is normal. He had 168 yards and 2 picks. Like, that could happen. And he threw for 320 against Wisconsin, which the Badgers defense is sometimes okay. And then, of course, every other game he's been like well over 280 to 300. So I'm looking at that one and thinking that he's going to hit the over pretty comfortably just off of volume alone. I don't think we'll see him have as bad a game as he just had. Purdue's offense just has too many weapons. I think he'll at least throw for like 250. So I like the over on that as well. And then the only other one, I mean, we'll see what the board comes out with. I think, I heard you had mentioned Drake May. Pretty much everything on him. I like the fantasy total. The combo on him, 33.5 is good. The combo pass plus rush yards may be too high now at 375.5, but it's Wake Forest. He will definitely throw for 300. How much will he rush for? Will it be, one of his 30s? Will it be one of his 80s? Like, that's another one that I'm kind of looking at. I'm liking this pass plus rush combo category this week between Tommy DeVito, Hacksaw, and Drake May. So lots of plays there that we've given. Even tomorrow between USC and Colorado, we know USC's defense can be susceptible, taking over the WR1 role. If we want to continue this trend of Colorado guys, Daniel Arias at 50.5 receiving yards. He now becomes the number one guy. 35 targets, 19 catches, 309 yards, and a touchdown. That's good. That's a good one for him. I think that they'll be throwing the ball, and Shrout can do some things here against this USC defense. They're still going to get pile driven, but it seems okay if you want one for tomorrow.
Only thing I would say about tomorrow, I've been very bullish on all USC overs all the time.
Yeah.
They are going to get Jordan Addison back, and they did start to feature Malik Brown a little bit. I'm probably not taking Travis Dye over 105.5, where I would ordinarily jump at, Travis Dye at anything under like 130 against Colorado, because, it's always possible that he breaks the long one and he gets there for that. But if he has kind of a normal Travis Dye 6 to 7 yards at a time kind of game, and also gets a lot of involvement in the passing game, I could see the Jordan Addison game happening and them being up, 21 points pretty quickly, and then turning things over to Malik Brown and mixing in, a few other backs here and there, and it not being a typical Travis Dye, 28 carry volume kind of game. So the logic would usually tell you, yeah, pound all the Travis Dye overs. I'm going to shy away from that a little bit this week, but I do like the call on Arias. And then I have a thing for hyphenated receivers. Lamonius Craig has not lived up to the hyphenated receiver brand at all. 31
first name of Montana, like anyone named Montana should be really good at football, you know?
Yeah, Montana Lamonius Craig. Like, come on, man. 31.5. Do we think he has a shot at that? Or he's he's so bad and inconsistent, but this is like the nut spot to get 32 receiving yards. You know,
no, I think he can do it. I think he can do it, especially with Tyson out. You know, he's had 5+ targets in 4 straight, so the opportunity will be there definitely. Right. So I might have to hit that one too. All right. So looking at some prop betting on DraftKings, you know, I was just about to look at, you had mentioned Travis Dye there. His rushing total is set at 102.5 there. The under definitely looks good. It is juiced a little bit at -130, but I think, you know, putting that with something else, maybe, you know, a little parlay or something could work out. So definitely might follow your instruction there. I'm you know, as long as he's healthy, Tony Mathis, it's sitting here at 64.5 on DraftKings. Like that. I really and it didn't give me a Kendre Miller number, unfortunately, but that's okay. He's 17.5 fantasy points on PrizePicks, by the way. I forgot to mention him, but I like that for him as well. There is a receiving number here, though, in the Illinois game. If I like the juice, you know, he's at Juice Williams, 46.5 receiving yards. Sometimes he has like these weird, you know, like 5 for 25 type of games. So it's not like a slam dunk play, but I do think he's going to produce quite well and continue his nice little stretch of 3-game, you know, ham, if you will. I have no faith in this Purdue defense at all. And I think Williams is going to kind of have some big plays here. Could potentially even have that 46.5 in on one throw. So definitely looking at that. 62.5 yards for Jalen McMillan. Yes, all over that. I would even be on the Rome play, which is 93.5. I'll definitely be betting my Huskies here in this spot for prop betting. And then Jake Bobo of UCLA, 57.5 receiving yards against an Arizona team that they can definitely, you know, defeat depending on what's going on with Sharps. Like he was a late scratch last week. I don't know what's, you know, his status, but, you know, Jake is definitely DTR's guy, and 57.5 won't be nearly enough, especially if Sharps is still banged up / out or whatever's going on with him. So a couple of prop bets there.
That was probably the most disappointing late scratch other than Sai Bangura so far this year.
The Bangura one hurt. The Bangura one hurt me the most, I think, because I had such a good lineup. But losing Sharps, even at the high ownership, that one hurt. Yeah.
But it was such a nut spot. Like you wanted to enjoy all of that Sharp really goodness, and it wasn't there. And Kaz Allen just went nuts.
And then a couple of bets. There was somebody in the chat that asked, how does this parlay between Syracuse, South Carolina, Kansas State, and TCU fail? And my answer was, and I'll say it here, is South Carolina. They can't defend the run at all. So I think that, you know, going up against Florida, Rich can run the hell out of it, and they have running backs who are definitely capable of running. So if you're looking for a reason not to bet it, that would be it. But I mean, why not? Why not take a shot, right? So game lines or any other bets I'm looking at, if KJ is good to go, and I might have to act quick on this, but Arkansas 3.5-point dogs at home, like that seems like a great spot. I thought of that immediately when I saw it come out. So I'm definitely looking there. West Virginia at home
+7.5.
I continue to play DFS plays against Oklahoma. I continue to bet against them. It hasn't worked so well the last week or two, but I'm going to keep at it because I think that Sooners are not going to, you know, continue this slight resurgence. I think Virginia is going to at least cover at home. And then Illinois -6.5 at home versus Purdue. You know, I think that they're going to win by like 10-14. If we want to, you know, think of it as Aiden O'Connell is going to have to throw for 300+ for them to have any shot. I just think Illinois probably wins that one a little comfortably. You mentioned the total earlier in the show, the 49.5 between Virginia Tech and Duke. They had some pretty good success on totals this year, and I definitely agree. I think that's one we can bet and feel good about. There's another one that's super low between Pittsburgh and Virginia. Now, if Abin Kenyatta is shelved for the season because there was talk of from his camp wanting him to just prepare for the draft at this point, then that 40.5 maybe not so safe. But those two are, Virginia's totally inept, but they can at least score 10 to 15. And then Pittsburgh can score, 25 to 30 against this Virginia team. But of course, if Abin Kenyatta is not in, but that 40.5 total seems pretty low for a football game in the ACC, at least in my opinion.
And Virginia playing with a lot of confidence too after giving North Carolina all they can handle. So
yeah, Armstrong's starting to look a little bit like his old self. He's still hamstrung by that terrible play calling, but yeah,
I played him in a few lineups last week. He did okay.
Yeah, for sure. And then the last one that I have, at least right now, is Penn State -10. They did as well at -14 last week against Maryland. Maryland, coming into the season, there's a lot of excitement about their receiver room and the transfers they brought in, and it just really hasn't come together for them. They've had injuries. Roman Hemby has been like the most exciting player in their entire program, surprisingly. And Penn State, even though they had a tough loss, relatively recently, they're still a really good defense. They're beating the teams that they should, Northwestern, Central, Minnesota, like they're just pile driving those teams. They had the tough loss against Michigan. They got beat up there. They had the tough loss against Ohio State in a game that, they probably could have maybe been a little closer in, but I think they'll just, a team like this, they'll win pretty handily. So 14 to 20. So I'll take Penn State as well. And those will be in the bet tracker. All right. So the rest of the week, for at least for college football, obviously we'll have a slate right up for tomorrow's, 3-game slate, the main slate out, for Saturday. Jake will have a afternoon or night slate right up for that one. There will be the Q&A show this week. I lost power last week, so I couldn't do it last week. I ended up doing the Sunday night CBB show from a hotel common area with hardly any lights. That was an interesting experience, but a lot of you watched, so that was cool. But as far as the rest of the shows, Saturday morning Q&A at 8 a.m. PST. Tomorrow night, covering the Saturday CBB slate at 9 p.m. PST, so I'll be back tomorrow night for that. Just so much content, so much college sports going on. Jake's helping me out with, this is his thing too. So he's doing more of the weekday things for me, which I really appreciate. Anything before we head out that you want to, mention, or you want to officially give maybe like a line in the sand place? Usually the part of the show where I like to get you to, give your super, maybe it doesn't even have to be super secret play, but the one where you're like, this is where I'm going. No one else is. And if he goes like, totally off, I get to own this play.
Yeah, I think I started with it pretty early in the show, and I'm going to stay committed to it. It is a Michigan running back, but it's not Blake Corum this time. We're going to go Donovan Edwards.
Love it. Yep. All right. Sounds good. I'm going to have to give me some Donovan Edwards. All right. Appreciate everybody who tuned in live. Make sure you smash that like button. If you're watching on demand, definitely still comment. We do circle around and answer those questions throughout. Otherwise, we'll see you on Saturday morning for the Q&A session. Best of luck this week. Let's keep rolling. Thank you very much, guys, and we'll see you later. My thing's not working. There it goes.